President Donald Trump is set to be officially nominated at the Republican National Convention next week, where Trump has also said that he will announce his vice presidential pick. Here with me now from Miami is one of the top contenders, Senator Marco Rubio. Thank you so much for being here this morning. I want to start by looking ahead to just what's going to happen in the next couple of days for the GOP in Milwaukee, and that is delegates are meeting to adopt the 2024 party platform. Now, for 4 decades, the Republican Party's platform endorsed a national abortion ban. Donald Trump opposes that, as you well know. He thinks it should be left to the states. There are a lot of conservative groups who are not happy about the potential to change the platform. Do you support changing the official party platform to Trump's position that it should be a state issue?
Well, I think our platform has to reflect our nominee. And our nominee's position actually happens to be one grounded in reality. The reality of it is the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. And what that basically means is that now it's not states, it's voters at individual states who will get to decide how and to what level they want to restrict abortion, if at all. Some states will have restrictions, some states will not. And so I hope that our platform will reflect our nominee. I also think it's important to remember the Democrats, their last platform, basically endorsed abortion paid for by taxpayers at any time without any restrictions. So I think really the question here is whether they are going to have a radical plank of their platform that basically requires Americans to pay for abortions at any time, for any reason, up until the moment of birth. That was their platform 4 years ago. Let's see what it looks like now when they meet again.
I'm not sure that's entirely true, but I want to focus, if I may, on what your party is doing. And something that the head of the Susan B. Anthony Group told me this past week, she and others, Tony Perkins as well, have said that they are concerned that removing the federal ban from the platform will depress enthusiasm for Donald Trump among core anti-abortion grassroots voters. Does that worry you?
Not really, because I don't think there's much of an option here. It looks like no matter who the Democrats nominate, it looks like maybe Kamala Harris would be the most liberal presidential candidate in American history, or a continuation of whoever's running the White House now with Joe Biden as its figurehead. The issue is that they are going to be radical. There's only one pro-life candidate in this race, and it's Donald Trump. I think his position on this has been that the reality, and that is you can't pass a federal law now, even if we wanted to. You couldn't pass one. But states, not states, voters in individual states now have the ability to influence what abortion laws look like in their state. And they can have that debate about how restrictive, to what level, what exceptions, and so forth. You couldn't even have that debate before the Supreme Court opened that up. All the Supreme Court ruled was that this was a political issue, that this was an issue that now voters would be able to decide via the people they voted for or voted against at the state level. And that's the reality.
Let me ask you about the Supreme Court and a huge ruling that they issued on Monday, that Donald Trump has broad immunity for official acts related to January 6th, the attack on the U.S. Capitol. When you voted to acquit Trump in his impeachment trial for January 6th, you said, quote, "Let history and, if necessary, the courts judge the events of the past." Well, this ruling by the highest court in the land precludes lower courts from doing what you suggested, at least with some actions, like conversations with the Justice Department. Are you comfortable with that?
Well, first of all, I'm uncomfortable with the fact now that we have a president who targets political opponents. That's what's happened under Joe Biden. Everybody, when Donald Trump was president, I can't think of a single prominent Democrat who was chased around, persecuted, prosecuted. It's funny to me to read these people and hear these people out there warning about all the horrible things they ridiculously claim Donald Trump is going to do if he becomes president again. They're the ones that have been going after their political opponents. Donald Trump has been the one that's been very clear that his vengeance is going to be by winning and making America great again, not going after his political opponents. He said that in your debate that you hosted.
Senator,
and they're the ones that have gone after political opponents.
There's no evidence that Joe Biden has gone after political opponents. His Justice Department
the evidence is in the headlines every day.
Well, the
every
Justice
day you open
Department
up
is
and some
also
other Republicans
going
to jail somewhere.
Democrat, your colleague Bob Menendez is in trial right now. So there's no evidence that Joe Biden is specifically going after. And my question for you, as a Republican,
well, they
somebody
only
who
go
could
after Democrats
potentially
that don't do everything the Democrats want them to do.
on the ticket, is whether you are comfortable with the way that the Supreme Court ruled, and frankly, not just about January 6th and about the potential for what Donald Trump could do with that power, but any president in the future, Democrat or Republican. It's a big precedent that the Supreme Court set.
Well, I think what the Supreme Court did is it clarified what the law is, and that is you cannot go after presidents for official acts, and there's a presumption of immunity for quasi-official acts or semi-official acts, or exactly the terminology they used on it. Not, they were pretty clear about that. And I think it's unfortunate that we have to have that conversation in America today, but understand why this has become topical, why we now have to discuss this issue. Because it is clear that we have reached an era where there are people in American politics who believe that our courts are now a weapon that can be used against their political opponents. You look at what their efforts and what they've done in the courts to persecute and prosecute Donald Trump. They've tried to bankrupt him. They've tried to silence him. They've tried to jail him. They've gone after his allies every single day.
Senator,
and some of these are ridiculous charges.
Senator, Donald Trump has said
yes,
that he would go after Joe Biden, that he would go after members of the Biden family. That's never something that we've heard
Donald
Joe Biden
Trump has said that no, he hasn't. And I watched the debate. You guys did a great job. I watched it, and he was asked, and he said, my vengeance will be winning and restoring America, making America great again. He did not say, I'm going to go after them and so forth.
Not at the debate, but he has said it elsewhere. Not at the debate, you're right. He said it elsewhere.
He has repeatedly said that his revenge will be to make America great again, to undo all their bad public policies.
Well, let me ask you.
He was president for 4 years. He didn't go after Hillary Clinton. He didn't go after Joe Biden. He didn't go after Barack Obama. He didn't go after any of their consultants. So you feel comfortable.
You're telling me
we
right
didn't see
now,
under him what we're seeing now.
You're telling me right now that a second Trump administration would not go after any Democrats, any of his political opponents, full stop. You've confidence that that wouldn't happen?
Yeah. He was president before, and he didn't do it then. He's already said that he wouldn't do that. He'll be too busy undoing all the damage of this disastrous presidency.
Let me ask you something else about the future.
He'll be too busy securing our border and making America prominent and respected in the world again.
Speaking of what a Donald Trump next White House would do, there is a conservative effort. It's called Project 2025, and it includes several former Trump administration officials. They are arguing, and they have in their platform, if you will, to purge thousands of civil servants from federal agencies, vastly expand the power of the presidency. And I want you to listen to what one of the leaders of Project 2025 said this week.
We are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
Are you comfortable with that?
Well, he's not running for president, is he? I mean, our candidate's Donald Trump. I didn't say Donald Trump say that. Donald Trump's running on common sense, on restoring common sense versus the lunacy of the last 4 years and the far left and the shadow government that now is running our country with Joe Biden as its figurehead. That's what he's running against. I mean, think tanks do think tank stuff. They come up with ideas. They say things. I like Heritage Foundation. I agree with some of the things they stand for, but there's a bunch of scholars and people that turn around and work on different projects. But our candidate for president is Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And Donald Trump is running on restoring common sense, working class values, and making our decisions on the basis of that, not on ideological lunacy, which is what we've seen over the last 4 years under Joe Biden.
Is that what Project 2025 is? Is it ideological lunacy?
No, I think it's the work of a think tank, of a center-right think tank, and that's what think tanks do. I can assure you, I don't have them with me today, but I've seen plenty of write-ups, frankly, not just from left-wing think tanks, but from columnists and others who are opinion writers who have actually come up with crazy ideas that are now the policies of the United States under Joe Biden. Things like, I don't know, letting people into our country and releasing them because there's no danger. Now we see that there is danger. Things like attacking American energy. And as a result, now the cost of living for all Americans has gone up. Those are radical ideas that began in the faculty clubs and in the think tanks of the far left that are now the policy and the laws of the United States in 2024.
Yeah. Just for the record, the numbers at the border are the lowest now than since 2021. But I want to ask the question right
10
now.
million
which
people
is
are in our country
just
illegally. They're
8
murdering people every day.
Just 8 days from now, the Republican convention begins. Donald Trump is expected to announce his vice president. He's holding a rally in Florida on Tuesday. What's the latest that you have heard? Any meetings, any conversations?
Well, like I would tell you on television today.
Why not?
Look, I've heard nothing. I know nothing, and you probably know more than I do about it. Donald Trump has a decision to make. He'll make it when he needs to make it. He'll make a good decision. I know for certain that I will be out there over the next 3 or 4 months working on behalf of his campaign in some capacity. I know that I'll be in the Senate, and I'll have an opportunity to continue to do that. And either way, all I care about at this point and what I care about the most is that we can't afford another 4 years like the last 4, and I'm willing to help in any way I can. And but as far as making an announcement, that's up to him and their campaign, and I don't have one for you this morning, that's for sure.
The Constitution says that presidential electors cannot vote for a president and a vice president who are both from their state. You and Donald Trump are both residents of Florida. If you're chosen to be his running mate, are you willing to move to another state or resign your Senate seat?
Well, I'm not. That's presumptuous. I don't know. I have no idea who he's going to pick, and those, like I said, we'll confront those issues when they come. But I think it's comforting for Americans to know that when Kamala Harris becomes their nominee, she can't pick Gavin Newsom, because I don't think we can afford as a country to have 2 Californians with their crazy policies become the law of the land.
Senator, you haven't thought
that's
about
reassuring.
this at all? You haven't at all had any discussions with your family, with your advisors on the what if? Do I have to leave Florida? Do I have to resign my Senate seat? That's not something you've even considered?
I think it's presumptuous to talk about any of those things in public, because President Trump hasn't made those decisions. When he makes those decisions, no matter who he picks, then those conversations will happen regarding whoever he picks. But we're not there yet.